All right, since we signed off on Thursday's show, the Major League Baseball season has begun. The playoffs were expanded from 10 teams to 16. The Blue Jays have found a home park. Several of the best pitchers in baseball have gone down with injuries. And now there is a massive outbreak of COVID-19 on the Miami Marlins, leading to questions, leading to calls for the season to be canceled, to be paused, and a team now, the Washington Nationals, reportedly voting not to travel to Miami to face the Marlins this weekend. A lot to talk about here on today's edition of Around the Bases on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for joining us. As always, a lot to talk about today, and a reminder as we get underway that all episodes of Around the Bases, as well as Touchline Talk and the J Mole Show, are available on demand at 110sportsmedia.com. Just click on the videos tab on the top of the homepage. You can also find our broadcasts in audio form on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or you can get the video form on YouTube. Any of those platforms, just search for 110 Sports. And remember to subscribe to the 110 Sports newsletter. Latest content, written stories, shows, and podcasts in your inbox every Friday. Just go to 110sportsmedia.com. Right side of the homepage is the information you need to subscribe. So there are developments in Major League Baseball happening by the minute. Things are happening rapidly right now. The script for this show has changed immensely just within the last 12 hours, 8 hours, 45 minutes. So we've got a lot to talk about today. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. This is the agenda for today's show. We're going to start by, of course, addressing the big matter. That is the Marlins COVID-19 outbreak. New details are coming in by the minute. We'll give you the latest information, what the players are saying, my thoughts on what's going on right now, and what the plan is for moving forward. We're going to spend a significant amount of time on that to start. Then we're going to go ahead and get into a couple of things which now seem like old news in the baseball world, but have actually happened since we last spoke on Thursday, and that is the Blue Jays finding a home stadium, the playoffs being expanded. Those were two major questions we didn't have answers to on Thursday's show. Now we do, so we will discuss those, even though they seem a little bit like old news at this point. Plus, Daniel Bard, we talked about him a week ago today. He made his first MLB outing in 7 years over the weekend, so we'll talk about that in our In Case You Missed It segment. We'll get into news and notes, of course, the latest headlines, storylines, player updates, injuries, and new information trickling in there as well. Then we'll get into some weekend standouts and weekend observations of the new rules that are in place, of the lack of fans, and then some pitchers and hitters who impressed over the weekend, who maybe it means something. Of course, we're talking about a small sample size. We'll wrap things up with a power ranking spotlight. So I'm doing power rankings now at 110sportsmedia.com every Monday. We'll talk about some teams of note in that. And then we'll do some odds and ends at the end of the show. Some interesting, fun stats to kind of lighten things at the end of the show. But we are going to start, of course, with the big story today, which is Major League Baseball has now postponed 4 games due to a COVID-19 outbreak within the Miami Marlins organization. At last count, at last check, a total of 17 individuals within the Marlins organization have now reportedly tested positive for COVID-19, 15 players and 2 members of the coaching staff. So there are a lot of aspects, a lot of angles, a lot of information, a lot of opinions and takes on this situation. So we're going to go ahead and sort of walk through this step by step and address some different aspects of the issues today, starting with what's the situation, how did this develop to what it is right now. So according to The Athletic's Jason Stark and Ken Rosenthal, the Marlins play the Phillies in Philadelphia on Sunday despite having 3 players learn that day that they had tested positive for COVID-19. And that was just 2 days after a 4th player had learned of a positive test. So that's 4 players on Sunday before the Marlins played the Phillies who had been known to have tested positive. 2 infectious disease specialists told The Athletic on Sunday that those 4 positives, fit the definition of a clear outbreak of the virus within the team. But it appears there was really little to no serious consideration about postponing that game. Matt Breen of the Philadelphia Inquirer reporting that the decision for the Marlins to play on Sunday was made amongst the players via a group text message. Infielder Miguel Rojas told reporters that the possibility of not playing was, quote, never the mentality. Then on Monday morning, the Marlins learned of 9 more positive cases, 7 players, and 2 coaches. Major League Baseball yesterday announced the postponements of Monday's Orioles-Marlins game and Yankees-Phillies game. Today's Orioles-Marlins game and today's Yankees-Phillies game have also been postponed. Ken Rosenthal was reporting this morning, and also confirmed by Jeff Passan of ESPN, that 4 more Marlins players have tested positive, bringing the total to, as I said, 17 individuals, 15 players, and 2 coaches. The Phillies have been awaiting test results after having, of course, just played the Marlins, which they did receive this morning. Bob Nightingale of USA Today reporting that a Phillies visiting clubhouse attendant tested positive, but no Phillies players, coaches, or staff has tested positive at this point. And that is, of course, good news. But it's important to note here that the CDC says that the incubation period for COVID-19 can be as long as 2 weeks. It appears to be that it can be multiple days to several days. So just because the Phillies test came back negative now, which is a very good thing, does not mean that will necessarily continue. Now, the rest of the baseball schedule continued as planned yesterday, with the exception of a rainout. So that's the situation right now in the broadest possible sense. So what's been the reaction? That's the second question we're going to look at here today. Many players and managers have expressed significant concern over the situation. Nationals manager Dave Martinez, who has a heart condition, underwent heart surgery last year, told reporters yesterday that his level of concern went from an 8 to a 12, and saying, quote, "I'm going to be honest with you. I'm scared. I really am. I go here, home, back here every day. That's all I do. I wash my hands. I went from 45 times a day to probably 99 times a day. Wear my mask everywhere I go, but there's always that concern, you know." Dodgers pitcher David Price, who opted out of the season, tweeted yesterday, "Now we really get to see if MLB is going to put players' health first. Remember when Manfred said players' health was paramount? Part of the reason I'm at home right now is because players' health wasn't being put first. I can see that hasn't changed." That's Dodgers pitcher David Price. Brewers pitcher Josh Lindblom reacted to the news yesterday, referencing Red Sox pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez, who was recently diagnosed with a heart condition believed to be related to his bout with COVID-19, saying, "If anyone is in danger, the safety is the most important thing. You can't expose people. You see the pitcher with the Red Sox just developed some heart conditions. If I was in a decision-making place, my conscience, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I knew I put people in danger. You've got to make hard decisions." Angels pitching coach Mickey Callaway, per the LA Times, saying, quote, "When something like that happens, it makes everybody a tick more nervous than they already are." And now we have a report this morning, which has been confirmed by several outlets, first reported by Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, that in a team vote, the vast majority of Nationals players voted against going to Miami for the 3-game series this weekend. This decision will rest with Major League Baseball. So the Nationals were scheduled to go play in Miami this weekend. The players voting, saying they don't intend to do that. Again, looking back at those quotes from yesterday, these were just a few of them. One of the most powerful statements was from Dave Martinez, saying he's scared about the situation and his concern has risen from an 8 to a 12. It is clear at this point that baseball is losing the confidence of several players and coaches that are taking the risks in playing this season. Now, some of the game yesterday expressed the sentiment that they knew something like this could happen and expressed some level of optimism that this could be a learning experience. Dodgers president Stan Kasten on MLB Network Radio yesterday saying, "Hopefully this is the worst outbreak we have this season because it will teach us some things. But I do think we expected something like this at some point, and maybe getting it out of the way earlier will help teach us things that will avoid repetitions of this going forward." Now, I should stop here to note that this quote and the other quotes that I just read off were from players and managers and front office personnel before this morning's news that additional Marlins players had tested positive. So the situation has certainly gotten worse since then. The Athletic's Mark Carrick and Andy McCullough writing last night that some within the game looked for reasons to push forward, repeating what has become a familiar mantra in recent weeks. They expressed trust in baseball's stringent protocols and emphasized a need to adhere to them. It was a constant theme with players who spoke publicly during Zoom calls on Monday, but others viewed the outbreak as proof that the rules aren't enough. Said one executive, "I think the overall lesson now is that these protocols and testing procedures do not work well enough to keep small outbreaks from becoming large ones." And one executive interviewed for the story said that they think baseball should pull the plug on the entire season, saying in part, "This was duct taped together and no one is following the fake rules anyway." And these are executives within Major League Baseball who, of course, have a vested interest in there being Major League Baseball this season. And then we have what the commissioner said last night, Commissioner Rob Manfred, on MLB Network, talking with Tom Verducci. And I'm just going to read you exactly what he said, because this is the best way to go about this rather than just me paraphrasing. This is exactly what Manfred said. Again, this is before the news this morning that additional Marlins players have tested positive. He said, "I don't put this in the nightmare category. Obviously, we don't want any player to get exposed. It's not a positive thing, but I don't see it as a nightmare. We built the protocols to allow us to continue to play. That's why we have the expanded rosters. That's why we have the pool of additional players. We think we can keep people safe and continue to play." Manfred added, "We expected we were going to have positives at some point in time. I remain optimistic that the protocols are strong enough that it will allow us to continue to play, even through an outbreak like this, and complete our season." So what would force Manfred to pause a team's season? He said that was, quote, "a team losing a number of players that rendered it completely non-competitive." And again, this was a quote from Manfred from before reports of 4 more positive cases from the Marlins came out this morning. According to reports, there are now 15 Miami Marlins, that is half of the team's 30-man active roster, to begin the season, if those reports are indeed accurate. Half the roster of the Marlins that has tested positive for COVID-19, and of course their timeline for return for any of those players is of course unknown, and their health is of course the most important thing. Absolutely. Full stop. But it's not as if this is a situation where anyone could potentially expect a certain number of those players to be good to go, get their negative tests in any sort of fashion that, you can't really put a timeline on any of it. And people have been asking the question this morning. I've seen it posed by a number of media personalities this morning. Would that be the line? Would that be the approach? Would we still be having the season continue as it is, as planned right now, if this was the Dodgers or the Yankees who didn't have half of their roster? So our third question here, a third sort of angle in approaching this is what's the plan now? The Baltimore Orioles, who had traveled to Miami to play the Marlins, returned home from Miami last night. The Marlins remain in Philadelphia. Now, at last check, the plan had been for the Marlins, the healthy Marlins who have tested negative, and whatever reinforcements they can get their hands on, I suppose, to travel to Baltimore to play the series against the Orioles, or at least some of those games that were supposed to be in Miami, as soon as tomorrow. And this is something epidemiologists have said is not nearly a long enough time for the Marlins to be isolated. LA Times talking to infectious disease experts who say the Marlins should be shut down for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Emory University epidemiologist Dr. Zachary Binney telling the LA Times, you need to let the virus clear itself out of the clubhouse because it can sometimes take a long time for the virus to show itself on a positive test or through symptoms. So it's very clear, and this is also what the epidemiologist said, you have to wait it out. You have to assume everybody on the Marlins right now is potentially infected. The only way to get past that is time. And that's something that baseball doesn't especially have if they're trying to, if they feel that they absolutely have to stick to this schedule that was laid out because of the delayed negotiations, because of the mess that existed back a few months ago. All of a sudden, we're trying to cram 60 games in 66 days. But, again, the scientists are clear here. Simply having the Marlins who have not tested positive just, you test everyone. Obviously, it's important to test everyone. But just because a number of Marlins haven't tested positive, just because there, is presumably 15 players on the active roster whose tests have come back negative, does not mean that that is going to continue to be the case. And simply waiting a couple of days and then traveling somewhere to play another Major League Baseball team, who then each of them are going to go their separate ways to continue playing other teams, could be an absolute disaster. Now, the Phillies got their test results back, but as far as their game being postponed today, and apparently that may not have been the case, but as of this morning when that call was made to postpone their game, there were still some players waiting on test results. So that game's been postponed for tonight. Phillies outfielder Andrew McCutchen on Twitter this morning saying, I come on Twitter to find out if we're playing or not. I don't wait for a text because media knows the answer before us, LOL. Now, in some ways, that's kind of funny, that's amusing, but the players are finding out that their games are being postponed via the media is not good. And it goes even farther than that because The Athletic's Matt Gelb reporting that this applies to Phillies management as well. According to sources, Phillies management was not informed by the league of the postponement of their game today before media reports. I mean, what is that? I mean, what a train wreck. The Phillies front office, every one of the Phillies organization is finding out that their game is being postponed by Ken Rosenthal and John Heyman and Jeff Passan and the like. What is the breakdown in communication? It's not even a breakdown. The failures in communication from the top of Major League Baseball right now is astounding. Of course, one thing that people have mentioned is, of course, in this plan for moving forward, this optimistic plan that the Orioles are going to be traveling to, that the Marlins are going to be traveling to Baltimore, the healthy Marlins. First of all, of course, we talked about how bad of an idea that is, according to scientists and doctors and experts. But presuming that does happen, of course, there are going to be questions about scheduling and the number of games, and there's this talk that maybe baseball abandons the idea that every team's going to play 60 games and goes based on winning percentage, but there's a huge number of schedule ramifications. I mean, that's going to be a bit of a mess, even under the assumption that somehow there is a Marlins-Orioles game tomorrow. There's still going to be scheduling questions and problems. But that's the big if there's even a game tomorrow. Which again, The experts are saying there should not be. So those are the three angles right now, the three major angles I wanted to sort of break this down. The fourth is sort of some other information, some other details in my reaction to the situation right now. We'll start with the Miami Marlins in particular. Sunday, the Marlins manager Don Mattingly said, quote, "We never considered not playing. We are taking risks every day." And then yesterday, Marlins team owner Derek Jeter said the health of our players and staff has been and will continue to be our primary focus. Now those two things just don't square. Those two things just don't work together at all. That the idea that you have that this is being decided by a team vote to play, how can that be how this works? We have multiple players testing positive. 4 players in just a couple of days. You cannot just go into the default assumption that that's it. You have to assume, as again, the infectious disease experts have said and are saying and continue to say in the context of sports and everything else, that you cannot assume that that's it. You have to assume when you have multiple positive tests within a team that that is something that's gotten out in the clubhouse, and that other players, you have to assume that other players could be infected as well. There should absolutely not have been a Major League Baseball game between the Marlins and the Phillies on Sunday. On the Major League Baseball side of things, the league put together a 113-page handbook on how to handle health and safety with regard to COVID-19. There are details about how players should be boarding airplanes, but there appears to be no set process in place for handling a potential outbreak with multiple players testing positive. The Marlins just said, hey, we want to play. That's completely unacceptable. How is there no plan in place, and it appears there is not a plan in place, for teams reporting multiple cases, or any cases, a potential outbreak to Major League Baseball? How is this the process that happened, where the team just, in group text, decided that we're going to play? NBC Sports' Craig Calcaterra on Twitter yesterday tweeting, "Either MLB's protocols have no data-driven mechanisms or decision-making hierarchy via which games are postponed, or else it has them but they were allowed to be ignored." I mean, that's it. So is there either there's a hierarchy, either it's just being ignored, a process that is supposed to be taking place for considering the postponement of games, or there just is no process at all, neither of which are acceptable situations. Sports Illustrated's Emma Basilari writing yesterday that MLB's 2020 operations manual has details on how players should board an airplane, how much time a baseball must sit untouched before it can be considered disinfected, how many physical therapists can enter a restricted area of a ballpark, addressing rosters, travel, visas, spitting, high-fiving, showering, saunas, wet rags. It does not address what happens if a club has so many players test positive for coronavirus that it can no longer field a reasonably competitive team. And yet, 4 days into the season, that is exactly the question the league faces. It took Rob Manfred and the commissioner's office way too long to speak on this yesterday. He went on, this story broke yesterday morning early. And the MLB put out a statement postponing games, but there was no word from the commissioner's office, no word from the commissioner, no interviews, no real statement other than that games had been postponed until pretty late in the evening when Manfred went on MLB Network with Tom Verducci. It's just continuing to be a mess. I mean, there has to be, number one, an explanation for why there was a Major League Baseball game on Sunday between the Phillies and the Marlins. Because that should not have been allowed to happen at all. There needs to be an explanation of, if this season is to try to continue, there needs to be an explanation of how that kind of situation is going to be avoided in the future and not allowed to transpire like it did. Newsday's David Lennon tweeting that the KBO's plan for an outbreak, that's the Korean baseball, is to shut down the league for 2 weeks and then reassess. They haven't needed to do that, but it speaks to how seriously such a problem is viewed, both for player safety and the public as a whole. So again, that's the plan of the KBO. That's what they had as they went into their restart in Korea, which of course had the coronavirus much more under control, significantly much more under control upon baseball's restart there than it is here. But their process was an outbreak, which, again, to be very clear, there's no debating what's happening on the Marlins is an outbreak. There was no debating that even before today's news of 4 more positives. The KBO's plan is to shut things down for 2 weeks and then reassess. The experts, again, say that the Marlins cannot just wait 2 days and then the rest of them who haven't tested positive from that one test from a few days ago can just go on and play the Phillies. I'm sorry, can go on and play can go on to Baltimore to play the Orioles. It's important to remember the setup of this system, and that's one thing people have been talking about a lot in the last few days. Players are not contained in a sort of bubble in Major League Baseball like is the case in the NBA upon the restart of the NBA this week. So players are going to be returning home to their families, to their communities. They're being tested every other day, and they're not receiving results immediately, which, of course, is just the way that things are. There are people across the country who are not receiving results for weeks. But these players are returning to their homes, to their communities, where people in their household have had to go to work, go to the grocery store. They're not contained. Now, people have mentioned, of course, it's been brought up in the last few days, the idea of the bubble, which is what the NBA and other professional sports leagues have done and are planning to do and are setting up to do and are beginning. But it is not as simple. First of all, it's not as simple as to say that a bubble could have worked for baseball the same as it has for the NBA, or the same as is happening in the NBA right now. First of all, so there's Joel Sherman of the New York Post had an interesting thread on Twitter talking about this yesterday. And he made some really good points about this situation. So first of all, baseball for potential bubble was looking at Arizona and Florida, or Arizona, Florida, and Texas reportedly. All of them became COVID-19 epicenters. So there's that factor. The NBA and the NHL are also going to be playing in arenas, and that's, of course, not the situation in Major League Baseball. Arizona was the most frequent place mentioned to be a hub for the bubble, for a potential baseball MLB bubble. It's 116. It was the high for yesterday in Phoenix was 116 degrees. And almost every game, of course, Major League Baseball game in Phoenix, in Arizona, would have been outdoors. Some would have had to have been played in the daytime. There would have had to have been teams going to multiple hotels. There wouldn't have been the situation that the NBA has with Disney World. So that's not to say that a bubble wouldn't have worked, or we're never gonna, of course, know. But it's just to say that it's not as simple as just, oh well, baseball should have just done the bubble situation like the NBA. It's more complicated than just saying they could have done what the NBA is doing right now. And a final thought on this segment. We've been talking about this situation for a while now to start the show, and eventually we are going to move on here momentarily to some on-the-field situations and the latest developments and injuries and whatnot. Final parting thoughts on this topic right now, and I'm checking to make sure that we don't have any new major developments on that front. And let's see. Before I share final thoughts here, Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic tweeting a minute ago that one scenario under discussion, according to source with direct knowledge, the Marlins and Phillies would quarantine for an undetermined period. The Yankees would travel to Baltimore and play the Orioles on Wednesday and Thursday. The Marlins and Phillies would try to make up postponed games later. That from Ken Rosenthal, The Athletic, on Twitter just 1 minute ago. But again, final thoughts on this topic. I keep coming back to the quote from Nationals closer Sean Doolittle from a little while back when he said, I think this was at the beginning of training camp, he said, quote, "Sports are like the reward for a functioning society." We are not a well-functioning society in the United States right now. That is the facts of the matter. COVID-19 is not under control in this country like it is in several other countries where sports have come back pretty successfully. In Europe, in South Korea, in countless other places. Of course, everyone wants sports back. Everyone wants the sports are an escape for a lot of people, but sports are not detached from the reality of the situation. Ever, even in the best of times, sports are not detached. They are not removed. The players that are playing them are not removed from the real world, and of course, that is especially true right now. So it's important to keep that context. We all want sports to come back, but we have not, in this country, controlled it to the point where we can expect it to come back with relative ease. So we'll see how this plays out in the days ahead. But I would not be surprised if we're back here on Thursday with this worse. We don't know where this is going to go from here, but as much as we want sports to be back in this country, as much as we want baseball to come back in this country does not have COVID-19 under control, and we cannot just force sports back at all costs. We're going to go ahead and take our first break here on Around the Bases. Went long on the first segment. When we come back, we are going to shift gears and talk about Major League Baseball's first 5 days of action. As of right now, the baseball season is going to continue on. There's still no indication that Major League Baseball is considering the postponement or pausing of the season entirely. So we are going to talk about Major League Baseball on the field action from over the weekend. That's coming up next. We'll talk about the Blue Jays finding a home, the expanded playoffs, all things that have developed within the time that has occurred as feel like old storylines, but they've occurred since we've last talked on Thursday. We'll get into that. Latest news and notes, weekend observations, and standouts. That's coming up next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. We of course are streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. And of course, we're going to continue to monitor the latest situation involving the Miami Marlins outbreak of COVID-19 and its fallout. Continuing to check throughout the show here. If anything new breaks, we'll bring it to you before the conclusion of this broadcast. But as of now, as I mentioned, the Major League Baseball season is not being paused. It is not being stopped overall, so there's still plenty of on-the-field action to talk about at this point. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that. And first, an interesting note from baseball over the weekend. There are no remaining teams who are undefeated in Major League Baseball right now. For the first time since 1954, no Major League Baseball team started the season 3-0. Every team in baseball started either 1-2 or 2-1. And that's something that hasn't happened, again, since 1954. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive into the storylines, the news and notes that are most prominent right now. So we're going to start with a segment called In Case You Missed It. When we last talked on Thursday, there were a couple of major questions we had that I talked about as we ended the broadcast. We were still waiting on word for where the Blue Jays would play their home games in 2020 after the Canadian government had denied the team permission to play their home games, denied the team an exception to play their home games at their home stadium in Rogers Centre in Toronto. We have an answer to that question. Another question we had on the broadcast on Thursday: would the playoffs be expanded? There were 11th hour negotiations between the players and the owners about the potential expansion of the playoffs, something that had been discussed back in return to play negotiations. We were counting down the hours to the start of the season, and we do have an answer on that situation. The playoffs, of course, have been expanded, so we'll react to that and also follow up on something we talked about a week ago today on the broadcast, which is the incredible story of Daniel Bard. So let's dive right in with the Blue Jays. Of course, we got our answer on Friday to where the Blue Jays will play their home games. The team will play the majority of their home games at their AAA facility in Buffalo, New York. This has gotten the approval of local and state leaders. Pittsburgh's PNC Park and Baltimore's Camden Yards were both among major league venues that were considered after the Canadian government rejected the Blue Jays' request to play in Toronto. The organization is now quickly working to make the necessary modifications needed to Sidelined Field in Buffalo, changes to the lighting, working on figuring out spacing in the clubhouses to adhere to social distance protocols, and other changes are being made right now to the Blue Jays AAA facility in Buffalo, New York. The park will not be ready to go for the Blue Jays' scheduled home opener tomorrow, so the team will play its first two home series against the Nationals and the Phillies on the road at those teams' ballparks to begin the season before they'll begin playing at their AAA facility in Buffalo. They'll begin playing their home games there. It's certainly good to have some certainty on that situation. That was, of course, a situation that was very much up in the air and unsettled and changing fast. There was an agreement that that the Blue Jays would play in Pittsburgh, and then that was rejected by the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Obviously, it's not an ideal situation for the Blue Jays, but it's good. It is what it is, and of course, making the best of the situation. It's good for them to have, at least starting in about a week or so from now, a place that is their home base for home games during the regular season. Another question we didn't have an answer to on Tuesday afternoon, as mentioned, would there be expanded playoffs? We had no reason to suspect, leading into the start of the season, on those days leading up to the beginning of the season, that there would be anything different than normal. Now, it was reported back during return to play negotiations between the players and owners that expanded playoffs had been discussed, but eventually, of course, Rob Manfred mandated a schedule after there was no agreement between the two sides, and that came with the standard playoff setup of 10 teams. So this change that happened at the last minute didn't come completely out of left field, but it was very last minute. Just a few hours before first pitch between the Nationals and the Yankees on Thursday, it was reported that the playoffs would be expanded from 10 to 16 teams. An announcement from Major League Baseball, an official announcement that the playoffs would be expanded, did not come until after the season had actually officially begun. The statement from Major League Baseball did not come until after the Yankees-Nationals game had started, which in and of itself is pretty wild. So here's the details. You probably know them by now, but each team from each, 8 teams from each league will make the playoffs. The top 2 teams from each division will make the playoffs, along with the 2 teams with the best record in each league who didn't finish top 2 in their division. The teams in the league are seeded 1 through 8, and then the playoffs start with a wild card series, which is a best of 3 series with all games played at the higher seeds park. So the 1 seed in the American League, let's say it's the Yankees, takes on the 8 seed in the American League. The team who made it as a wild card team who didn't finish in the top 2 in their division. So 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, etc. There are no first round buys for top seeds or anything like that. So after this process plays out, and the fact that there's no travel means that it's 3 days in a row. It means that the playoffs aren't going to be lasting deeper into October. This gets us down to 4 teams from each league, and then the division series begin as normal, and the rest of the playoffs proceed as in the past, a best of 5 division series, and then a best of 7 championship series and World Series. My thoughts on this, I will tell you, on Thursday when we discussed this, I was a little bit, maybe just honestly a little bit irritated by the fact that this was coming so much at the last minute. I thought things had settled and was kind of just like, look, leave it be, don't change it at the last minute. Overall, though, I think this is a good thing. This is something that was, when it came up in negotiations, returned to play a couple months ago, I thought it would be good because the season's, of course, going to be 60 games. It's going to be wild. It's going to be unique. Let's just embrace it and try to get more teams in the playoffs. There are some potential drawbacks to the situation, including, a 3-game series between the number 1 seed and the number 8 seed. I mean, anything can happen in that kind of scenario. So you're not really getting any benefit of being the 1 seed. So let's say the 1 seed's the Yankees, the 8th seed is the White Sox, or the 8th seed out of the AL. A 3-game series between the Yankees and the White Sox in New York, where presumably there's no fans, the home field advantage may be pretty minimal. The Yankees may clearly be the better team, but I think, a 3-game series, we see it happen all the time where, a team like the Orioles can take 2 of 3 from the Yankees. I mean, even a horrible team can take 2 of 3 from a good team. So there's the drawback there that there's a good chance, we could definitely see some powerhouse teams who we think are the best in baseball being knocked off in that wild card round. But, on the one hand, just embracing the uncertainty of the season, getting more teams in the playoffs, I think is a good thing. As far as the impact of this on the regular season, almost every team now has a really realistic path, or at least a somewhat realistic path, to the playoffs. The top prospects on some teams that are a little bit weaker, 500-ish expected teams, those top prospects could get the call as those teams now see a path toward the playoffs. I can really only count maybe 5 or 6 teams who really, I don't think, have any shot at the playoffs. So we're talking 25, 23 teams that see a realistic path toward playing in October. And that's gonna be really fun to see that play out, presuming that we do get to see that play out. One other, in case you missed it, we talked on the show exactly 1 week ago about the tremendous story of reliever Daniel Bard, who had secured a spot on the Rockies roster 7 years after his last big league appearance. Bard was a highly successful reliever who was considered the Red Sox closer in waiting, hadn't pitched in the majors since 2013 after battling the yips. On Saturday, after 2,646 days, Bard returned to the mound in an MLB game, hitting 99 miles an hour at age 35 and throwing 1 1/3 scoreless innings to pick up the win, his first win since May 29th, 2012. 20 of his 25 pitches were for strikes. It looks like he performed like a high-caliber major league reliever. This is an incredibly compelling and exciting story, one of the most compelling in Major League Baseball right now, one of the most fun, uplifting, compelling feel-good stories in Major League Baseball right now. It's, of course, being overshadowed by a lot else going on, which is understandable. But this is really an inspirational story that certainly deserves some recognition. Hopefully things continue to go well for Daniel Bard in 2020. All right, we're going to go ahead and move right along because we still have a good amount to get to here on the show today. We'll move into news and notes. So a number of star pitchers have been dealing with injuries from opening day through now. Los Angeles Dodgers ace Clayton Kershaw, just hours before he was slated to start on opening day on Thursday, he was placed on the IL due to back stiffness. Now, Kershaw, of course, has had some back problems before. Dustin May was recalled from the team's alternative training site, and he filled in admirably for Kershaw. Kershaw threw a bullpen session on Sunday, though, and he's not expected to be out for too much longer. Obviously, back things can be tricky, but seems to be good news for Kershaw that he should be back for the Dodgers pretty soon. Nationals starting pitcher Steven Strasburg was scratched from his scheduled start on Saturday against the Yankees due to a nerve issue in his right hand. Strasburg received a cortisone injection. The team is optimistic he won't miss much time either. It appears we actually may have a new update on Strasburg here. Let me take a look here. The latest on Strasburg we have for you is that he threw lightly yesterday and felt good, according to manager Dave Martinez. So it seems like he's trending in the right direction. So we'll see exactly what happens with Strasburg. But those two injuries don't appear to be super serious. Two that do, though, appear to be serious are Justin Verlander and Corey Kluber. Verlander, the Astros ace, the Houston Chronicle reported Sunday afternoon that the AL Cy Young, reigning AL Cy Young winner Justin Verlander, he would be shut down for the remainder of the season with an elbow injury. So it's pretty much like Verlander's done. And then after the game, manager Dusty Baker said, though, that he's dealing with a right forearm strain and will be shut down for a couple of weeks. Verlander himself tweeted, "The report that I'm currently missing the rest of the season is not accurate. There's a forearm strain. I'm hopeful that with some rest, it will heal and I'll be able to return soon. Thank you for all the well wishes." So that's the situation with Justin Verlander. Of course, it's very possible that Verlander does end up missing the rest of the season. Situations with forearm strains and elbow injuries, it's all connected, and a situation where you think it may be just a couple week absence can easily turn into a significant situation, a Tommy John surgery, a real problem, a season-ending injury very easily. So we'll see how this plays out, but I would not expect to see Verlander any time before September, would be my belief at this point, at the earliest. The loss of Verlander is a tremendous blow to the Astros rotation that's already much thinner than it's been in recent years with Garrett Cole in New York. The team's going to lean very heavily on Zach Greinke and Lance McCullers at the top of the rotation now, as well as they're going to need more from several younger, unproven pitchers. Now, there's promise with a lot of those guys. They have some interesting pitching prospects, but it's interesting to note that Fangraphs projections dropped the Astros' odds of winning the World Series from 13.7% to 11.7% from the beginning of the beginning of Sunday to yesterday morning after that news had broken of Verlander, and then the Astros had also lost in that time. Then there's the Rangers' Corey Kluber. His debut with Texas did not go as planned. The former AL Cy Young winner lasted just one inning versus Colorado before being pulled due to shoulder tightness. On Monday, the team announced he's been shut down for 4 weeks after being diagnosed with a grade 2 strain in a back muscle of his pitching shoulder. This appears like it could very well be another lost year for Kluber, who missed most of last season with a fractured arm and an oblique injury. The best case scenario for Kluber seems to be him returning as a reliever in September. Texas is going to need a good rotation with the general lack of star power in their lineup. There's Joey Gallo, there's Elvis Andrus, there's Shin-Soo Choo, and then that's it with really proven hitters in that lineup. They've got Lance Lynn, Mike Minor atop that rotation. They're going to become even more important that they repeat some of their success from last season for the Rangers to compete this year. A couple of other injury updates for you. Anthony Rendon, the third baseman now with the Angels, remained sidelined yesterday due to an oblique injury. He has yet to play this season, but manager Joe Maddon says he expects him to be ready to play today. Toronto placed reliever closer Ken Giles on the IL with right elbow soreness. He left Sunday's game against the Rays with an injury. With that injury, Anthony Bass expected to fill in at closer. White Sox outfielder Eloy Jimenez hit off a tee and did some throwing yesterday. He's reportedly showing no concussion symptoms after crashing into the outfield wall on Sunday. Toronto shortstop Bo Bichette was scratched from the team's starting lineup yesterday due to left hamstring tightness. The White Sox announced yesterday they placed right-hander Ronaldo Lopez on the IL with a shoulder strain. Veteran left-hander Gio Gonzalez is taking his place in the rotation. A couple other updates for you on the news player updates front. In a surprising move, Atlanta manager Brian Snitker told reporters last night after the team's loss to the Rays that the team will DFA right-handed pitcher Mike Foltynewicz. The 28-year-old started that game for the Braves, allowing 6 earned runs in 3 1/3 frames. The Braves now have a limited window to trade Foltynewicz or place him on irrevocable waivers. The Royals have signed Matt Harvey to a minor league contract. The Pirates activated outfielder Gregory Polanco from the 10-day IL after he had missed the beginning of the season after testing positive for COVID-19. The Washington Nationals signed veteran utility man Josh Harrison to a contract yesterday after he had been cut by the Phillies. Mike Trout is now officially eligible for the Hall of Fame by playing on Friday. Trout has now appeared in 10 Major League seasons, making him eligible for the Hall of Fame. This was, it seems weird to say, the only remaining hurdle for Mike Trout to make the Hall of Fame, because even if he retired tomorrow, Mike Trout is a Hall of Famer. So really his last hurdle was playing in a 10th Major League season. That's how incredible, of course, Mike Trout is. Toronto right-handed pitching prospect Nate Pearson will make his MLB debut tomorrow against the Nationals. Pearson is the number 8 prospect in Major League Baseball, according to MLB.com. Last year, at 3 levels of the minor leagues, a .230 ERA, 119 strikeouts, and 101 2/3 innings. Pearson could make an immediate impact. I had Luis Robert as my AL Rookie of the Year pick, but I absolutely could see Nate Pearson winning that award as well. He's a highly regarded prospect for the Blue Jays. Final notes here for you as some information still trickling in today. Of course, things are happening by the minute. Let's see here. Alex Wood was placed on the 10-day IL by the Dodgers due to left shoulder inflammation. Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, Super Bowl MVP Patrick Mahomes has joined the Royals ownership group. Here's a weird one, a wild one. Mahomes becomes the youngest part owner in sports history. And so I could get into this. This news just coming in within our broadcast today, but we'll save that and perhaps talk about it on Thursday. Some fascinating news there. We're going to go ahead and get into a couple of opening weekend observations for you now. Still have a good bit to get for you here on the show before we head out, but we're going to run through these pretty quickly here just to get through the things I have prepared for you today. The extra innings rule is in effect now in Major League Baseball. Shohei Ohtani became the first runner to start at second base in extra innings. We saw some wackiness with the rule over the weekend. The Royals scored a run in the top of the 10th inning against the Indians on Saturday, despite 0 official at-bats in that inning. They started with a runner on second base. There was a sacrifice bunt, then a sacrifice fly that scored a run, then a walk, then a runner thrown out stealing. 0 at-bats for the Royals in that entire inning, but they scored a run in the 10th. After the game, Indians pitcher Mike Clevenger ripped the new rule on Twitter, writing that the new extra innings rule is the wackiest expletive I've ever seen. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get a runner to second off the back end of a bullpen? Hashtag make them earn it. Several pitchers, we talked about it before on the show, Yankees pitchers and others have expressed their dislike for this rule. It's certainly been an interesting one here these first days of the season. It's going to shorten games. It's going to lead to longer extra inning games, which is what baseball's goal was. And it's going to increase excitement or people being upset or happy about it or chaos surrounding the rule. But I'm certainly not willing to change my stance, which I've expressed here previously. I'm not on board with the rules change being a permanent thing at all at this point. Impact of the fanless games is another topic we're going to discuss here really quickly. We saw some interesting things adjusting to the to the environment without fans in the stands. We have some stadiums with cardboard cutouts, and outfielder Adam Duvall, the Braves, hit Jeff McNeil's dog, a cutout of Jeff McNeil's dog with a home run that he hit. Uh, and then there are virtual fans on the Fox broadcasts, which is something I did not like. I'm completely fine with the cutouts, and I understand of course, the empty stadiums. It's just a reality. We'll all get used to it. What I did not like was the virtual fans that Fox was using on its broadcasts. The Boston Globe's Pete Abraham tweeting, "It's not a big deal, but this is unethical. That fans cannot attend games amidst a deadly pandemic is the biggest story in baseball this season. Fox's job is to show viewers what is happening at the park that day, not a digitized version of what they want it to be." And I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. The idea of just these video game fans in the stands, like, that's just not necessary. This is a reality of baseball in 2020, is that there are not fans. We need to accept that. It's going to be fine. You, as far as, nobody's gonna. We can all get used to those seats being empty on broadcasts. It's fine. I think that's a wholly unnecessary thing for Fox to be doing on their broadcasts, but we'll see how that plays out. ESPN and other networks have said that they are not intending to do that at this time. Another major storyline from the weekend, it feels like it's been a while ago now. Several MLB players and coaches, and in some cases entire teams, took a knee prior to the singing of the national anthem on opening day in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Many players on those teams then rose for the national anthems, while others, including managers in some cases, remained kneeling during the anthem. One striking image from opening day, star outfielder Mookie Betts, who just signed a massive contract extension with the Dodgers, the biggest contract extension in MLB history, kneeling during the anthem with Cody Bellinger and Max Muncy placing their hands on his shoulders. Betts, whose father served in the Air Force, said in 2016 that he would never kneel during the anthem because of his father's service. This is part of what he told reporters after the game, per The Athletic. He said, quote, "I wasn't educated, my fault. I need to be educated on the situation. I know my dad served and I'll never disrespect the flag, but there's also got to be change in the world. Kneeling has nothing to do with those who served our country. Kneeling is for the injustice." So that was one of the big storylines from the beginning of the baseball season, back from Thursday and Friday. Again, it feels like that's been several weeks ago now, given what's happened in recent days. But that was one of the storylines from the weekend. All right, we're going to go ahead and take one more break here on Around the Bases. Running up on the top of the hour, we are going to go long a little bit again today. Just so many things that have happened this opening weekend. We'll go quickly through some weekend standouts for you, and some final power ranking spotlight thoughts for you coming up next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. We have some new information just coming in here within the last couple of minutes. Craig Mish of Sports Grid is reporting that the Marlins season has been paused for the time being. The tweet from Mish: the Miami Marlins 2020 season has, at least temporarily, has been paused. This will allow the team to continue to monitor health and safety of players. This seems to be it's really the only choice that made any sense at all at this point. Again, at last count, 17 individuals within the Marlins, including 15 players and 2 coaches, have tested positive for COVID-19. We're going to have more clarity on this situation soon, I am sure, where it's not exactly clear what, pausing exactly entails and what the ramifications of that are going to be and what the plan is. We're going to, of course, continue to monitor this. I'm sure it'll be a topic. I'm sure we'll be back talking about it on Thursday's show. So we'll continue to monitor that moving forward. One other news item that's come in during the broadcast I want to bring up quickly here. The Mets have reached a minor league deal with catcher Bruce Maxwell, according to Tim Healy of Newsday. Maxwell is best known for becoming the first MLB player to kneel during the national anthem, and the 29-year-old has not appeared in a affiliated baseball game since the end of the 2018 season when he was let go by the Athletics. So we'll continue to see how that story develops as well. That may also be something we talk about on Thursday. All right, so we are running a little bit long today, but we're just going to roll with that because I have a couple other things I want to bring up today. Of course, it was important to devote a good chunk at the beginning of the show there to talk about the situation with the Marlins, but I did want to talk about a couple of standouts from over the weekend. We'll just run through these really quickly. Not going to give a ton of information on each of them, but we'll just run through some interesting performances from over the weekend that I thought stood out. Dodgers pitcher Ross Stripling pitched 7 innings of 1-run ball with 7 strikeouts against the Giants over the weekend on Friday. He's been shuffled back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen for the Dodgers in recent years, but the Dodgers need him with Price out, with Alex Wood on the IL. Now, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, the Dodgers need Ross Stripling, and I think he could be a really underrated option to succeed here in 2020. Cubs starter Kyle Hendricks threw a 3-hit shutout against Milwaukee in the Cubs season opener on Friday. 103 pitches, 9 strikeouts, exactly 0 pitches above 90 miles an hour. He became the first Cubs pitcher to toss a shutout on opening day since Bill Bonham in 1974. He also joined Clayton Kershaw as the only players in the last 30 years with opening day shutouts without allowing a walk. And it's just the third opening day shutout with 9+ strikeouts and no walks since 1901. The last, Bob Gibson in 1967. Hendricks was named NL Player of the Week. He's been underratedly solid in recent years, but hasn't really performed at an elite level since 2016 when he had a league-leading 2.13 ERA. Craig Kimbrell of the Cubs, a negative standout. The Cubs escaped with an 8-7 win last night against the Reds, despite Kimbrell just about blowing it in every way possible. The closer had absolutely nothing. Here's how his appearance broke down on the mound for the Cubs last night. A walk, a wild pitch, a ground out, a walk, a steal, a walk, a hit by pitch, and another walk. Per MLB.com, Sarah Langs, Kimbrell was the first pitcher with 4+ walks and a hit by pitch while recording just 1 or fewer outs in a game since Ryan Dempster for the Cubs back in 2011. It was just a brutal outing for Kimbrell, who it appears is going to get a little bit of a leash to continue in a high-leverage role, at least for the meantime. He, of course, signed late last season with the Cubs and didn't look good pretty much all season once he was activated. Jeremy Jeffress came on and got the save for the Cubs last night. Real bullpen concerns in Chicago right now, though. A couple other pitching standouts. Shane Bieber of the Indians. The right-hander matched an opening day strikeout record with 14 Ks against the Royals in 6 innings. It's the most of any pitcher on opening day in 24 years. Shohei Ohtani for the Angels, a standout in a bad way. His return to the mound was a disaster, simply. He was pulled after recording no outs. He did not record a single out before he was pulled against Oakland over the weekend on Sunday. He was charged with 5 earned runs on 3 hits and 3 walks. So something to keep an eye on. Of course, Ohtani coming back from Tommy John surgery. Hopefully he can get things back on track. The Angels and Ohtani insist that there's nothing medically, physically wrong with him. And here's a positive standout. We'll switch back to a positive standout. This is a really a good one to see, and that's Carlos Carrasco of the Indians. His first start in the major league since being diagnosed with leukemia last year. 6+ innings, 5 hits, 2 earned runs, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts. Great to see. And if he's doing well, that Cleveland rotation with him, Mike Clevenger, and Shane Bieber could help keep this team in the hunt for not just the playoffs, but the AL Central title deep into the regular season, despite some offensive questions behind their 2 stars. A couple of hitting standouts for you. Kyle Lewis of the Mariners, once considered one of the top outfield prospects in baseball. He's off to a sensational start in his first 3 games of the season, .364 with 2 homers and 4 RBIs. So that Mariners team, not expected to be a playoff contender, even with the expanded playoffs in the shortened season. But Kyle Lewis, an intriguing player to watch in 2020. Giancarlo Stanton of the Yankees, he is back and already the leading candidate for AL Comeback Player of the Year. He hit the first home run of the 2020 season with shots on opening weekend, home runs of 426 and 483 feet. If he can remain healthy, he could make, of course, we know what Giancarlo Stanton can do at the plate. Could be a huge difference maker. And Nelson Cruz of the Minnesota Twins, their DH. That Twins offense picked up right where it left off last season over the weekend. And a big part of that was Cruz. At 40 years old, he led baseball in home runs last decade, and he's showing no signs of slowing down. On Sunday, he became the oldest player in MLB history with 4 extra base hits and 4 RBI in a game. He also became the oldest player to hit a home run in a game since 43-year-old Ichiro in August 2017. He was named AL Player of the Week. So Nelson Cruz just continuing to defy Father Time on that one. We'll move on here to our Power Rankings Spotlight for the week, as I mentioned earlier in the show. At 110sportsmedia.com every Monday, I'll be publishing my Power Rankings of all 30 MLB teams, ranking 1 through 30, of course. A couple of spotlights. We're not going to spend much time on that this show, but the anticipation being moving forward every Tuesday show, we'll spotlight a couple teams who have moved significantly in my power rankings. This was the first one. No big movers, but a couple ones to highlight. The Dodgers are in first. They have some pitching injuries now with Alex Wood out as well, but they've shown me no reason to believe they're anything other than the best team in the National League to start the season. They're first. The Astros have fallen from 3rd to 5th with the news of the Justin Verlander injury. I say fallen. They were never actually in 3rd. I had them penciled in there on Sunday until the Verlander injury. Then I moved them down to 7th. Then it came out that it may not be completely a season ender, so they're at 5th for now, but we'll see. That's definitely a vulnerable team, a vulnerable rotation right now. The Twins come in at 3rd. We talked about them picking up right where they left off. The Twins scored 27 runs in 3 games over the weekend, and Nelson Cruz, no signs of slowing down. The Reds come in at 7th. That's an interesting team. Their top 3 starters opening weekend, Sonny Gray, Luis Castillo, and Trevor Bauer, each threw 6 or more innings with 9 or more strikeouts and 1 earned run for each of them in their first outings of the season. That could be one of the better top trios to leading a rotation in baseball, especially if Trevor Bauer is good Trevor Bauer as we've seen him in the past. The Cubs come in at 11th in the power rankings this week. The Nationals are at 9th, given they would be a little higher, but given the situation, Juan Soto's still out. Reporting today that there's some frustration because he's testing and there's just problems with him getting the 2 negative tests, some confusion about that situation. He's still out for now. Strasburg still hasn't pitched yet this season, so the Nationals are down at 9th instead of a little higher where I would have had them if they were more healthy to start the season. All right, we'll move on here. Just a couple of odds and ends to close out the show. We are running a little bit over, so if you are still with us here on this Tuesday, thank you for making us a part of your day here on the 110 Sports Network. Odds and ends to wrap up the show. These were just some really fascinating stats from opening weekend and opening day. Padres first baseman Eric Hosmer became just the second first baseman in MLB history to drive in 6 runs on opening day, joining Bill Terry in 1927 on the New York Giants. The opening day starting infield for the Blue Jays of Kevin Biggio, Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and Travis Shaw consisted of 4 players who are the sons of former Major League Baseball players. It's just the second time in MLB history that that's occurred, per MLB Stats on Twitter. Scott fans like Jerry Hairston Jr., DeJesus Jr., and Deke Gordon in 2012 with the Dodgers were the first time that that's ever happened. And here's a wild fact for you. Coming from Rangers broadcaster CJ Nowitzki, the Rangers opening up a new ballpark in 2020. They've now had 3 in their history. Arlington Stadium in 1972 was when it first debuted, Globe Life Park in 1994, and now Globe Life Field in 2020. All 3 of those stadiums have debuted in shortened MLB seasons. That's just a wild, fascinating stat that caught my attention. Finally, ESPN's opening night broadcast of the Yankees-Nationals drew 4 million viewers, making it the largest audience for an opening night game ever, and the most watched regular season baseball game since 2011. So there was certainly an appetite for Major League Baseball in 2020 to begin the season with that opening night contest. We are, of course, going to continue to monitor the situation with the Miami Marlins and the impact that has on the game. Again, the latest reporting, Craig Mish of Sports Grid reporting the Marlins season has been paused for the time being. This is, of course, a developing story. We're going to continue to keep an eye on it. We will be back with you on Thursday here for ATB Live on the 110 Sports Network. Of course, reminders that the J. Mole Show with Josh Molinix is back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, and Touchline Talk with Josh Doring on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, followed by, shortly thereafter, ATB Live. Reminder that this show and every 110 Sports Network show is available on demand, 110sportsmedia.com. Click on the videos tab. Also on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for 110 Sports. Thanks so much for joining us for today's edition of ATB Live. I'm Chris Brown. Stay safe, and I will talk to you on Thursday.